The tone of his voice held sarcasm so thick it could have fallen out of the air. I can't. Oh, Sarah couldn't contain her laughter. However, before she could even begin to calm herself down, Mick cut off. Espen, can you please do me a favor and check to see if there are any more of these types of documents available to us? Certainly. The synthesized voice spoke through the intercom system. The hammer has transferred me several such data files, and they have already been verified safe through my internal systems. Would you like me to send them to you? Though the voice sounded the same, Mick thought he could hear something different about it. However, he was too distracted by the subject at hand, and the thought quickly melted from his mind. Perfect, Mick exclaimed, trying to speak up over Sarah's now reinvigorated laughter. And yes, please, I'd like to review as much as I can before our next meeting. Speaking of which, any update on that? It had been a few hours since their first meeting, which was long enough to take time to relax a bit and review some of the newly acquired data. However, it was also long enough for Mick to start worrying if his emotional reaction had been a bit much for his counterparts. Even though everything he said was true, he could see in the biological entity's eyes that they were horrified by what they heard. Yes, the hammer sent over the request while you were enjoying your meal, and I did not wish to disturb you. They are also requesting to be allowed to bring an additional person along for the next meeting. Did they say who this person was? Though Mick had a sinking feeling that he might know who it was, he didn't want to immediately react. A clear-headed response was always better than an emotional reaction. No, they did not. Would you like me to request the identity of this person? No, I'm pretty sure I know who it is. Mick was now deep in thought, and no longer paying Sarah enough attention to realize she had calmed down, and was now looking at him with an inquisitive expression. Yeah? And who is it? Sarah interrupted in a manner which implied Mick was full of it. Who do you think? Mick retorted in a somewhat harsh tone. One of the Nishnade. He didn't quite shout, but realization had the same impact on Sarah. Disease. She barely even had a chance to finish the word before Mick interrupted her. I know. I'm not about to kill one of my distant cousins because I didn't take precautions. With Mick's mind already racing, he didn't need Sarah's excitement adding to the stress. All right, calm down. These are FTL-capable aliens who obviously have been monitoring our species for a while now. They have to know about our diseases and the problems they can cause. Sarah was very much winging it, but the statement made sense in her head. You're right, Mick finally admitted after taking a deep breath. Taking another, even deeper breath, he was able to center himself enough to think properly. Espen, can you? He was cut off by the intercom before he could finish his request. Already on it, I'm asking the hammer about communicable diseases and the protocols for combating them now. Though the voice pattern of the AI hadn't changed, something had. The thought was starting to crawl its way back into the back of Mick's mind before Espen continued. Would you like me to simply patch him through? It may be easier for him to explain the systems and procedures himself. Who? Sarah wasn't exactly sure who the ship was referring to, as the biological beings they had met were both women, and the robot didn't really seem to have a gender. The hammer Espen responded, The governing AI, which acts as the captain of the vessel, designated the hammer, refers to himself in the masculine. He's sentient? Mick asked, almost excitedly. Sentient AIs were incredibly rare back in the Sol system, and Mick had been trying for years to create one. Espen being the most recent iteration of those efforts. Efforts. Yes. The synthesized response stunned both as they sat deeper into their chairs. And from my evaluations, it would be fair to describe his personality as quite pleasant. In fact, I believe he would even qualify as a gentleman. Yeah. Go ahead, please. Patch him through. The amazement was still obvious in his voice as Mick rushed to respond. He wouldn't let the chance to talk to a fully awakened alien AI pass him by. Greetings, travelers. The voice, which replaced Espen's through the intercoms, was noticeably masculine compared to Espen, but still carried a quite pleasant tone. You requested information regarding our disease and biological contamination procedures. Is that correct? Yes. The response came from Sarah as Mick's excitement was causing his mouth to fail to form words. Specifically things like vaccines or... Sarah paused as she was trying to think of a way to explain the concept of giving a person a disease so they would become immune to it later. One moment, please. I would like to process a request for classified information so that I may give you a more satisfying answer. This caused Mick and Sarah to shoot each other confused and slightly worried glances. As the room fell quiet for a moment, the request was approved. But where do I begin? The artificial voice sounded almost biological in the way it flowed into that question before going silent again. I'll start with the most obvious. The masculine voice popped back up. We've already developed various vaccines and full-spectrum inoculations against everything we have information on, including from scans of your vessel. Specifically, we have been able to intercept communications traffic from your system for as long as you had radio. Some of those communications have contained a fair amount of data regarding diseases. Your militaries also seem to have a disagreeable habit of modifying pathogens in order to make them more contagious, lethal, or what have you. And then they transmitted all of that data over radio signals. We have vaccines and cures for everything from your common cold to cholera to your biological weapons. They are up to date as of 1 Earth year ago, which is roughly the delay on our probe monitoring your home system. Before you ask, these are all commonly available and will become mandatory under the appropriate circumstances for susceptible individuals who may be traveling through galactic community space to and from certain destinations, including your system. I wonder how pissed off Langley is going to be once they find out y'all already know all their dirty little secrets. Mick commented as he started to laugh. The relief of knowing he wasn't going to be responsible for spreading potentially diseases was enough to greatly lighten his mood. Sarah wanted to join in on the laughter before she remembered that those were her bosses that Mick was making fun of. Yeah, they are mostly likely going to be mad about that. She added, I mean, it's not like they can or will do anything about it. The hammer chimed in. This is, quite literally, standard operating procedures. It is no one's fault but their own for being the way that they are. But before we get too far off topic, please allow me to conclude. You do not have to worry about spreading communicable diseases, and everyone on board who needs inoculations has received them. Now, with that resolved, we are able to schedule the next meeting within the hour. If you so choose, of course. Mick looked at Sarah, and Sarah looked at Mick, while both considered the fact that they were soon to meet another human. One who had spent his entire life separated from the Earth and the Sol system. Yeah, they both said in unison, before Sarah gestured for Mick to continue alone. That sounds good. We'll be at the airlock whenever you tell us to be. Tense's voice was quite a bit more excited than it had been at any point thus far on the relatively short tour of the Espen. This is beautiful. Though their initial greetings were a bit awkward, the introductions between Mick, Sarah, and Tense had been fairly uneventful. A few attempts at exchanging words in what Mick and Tense both believed to be the Anishinaabe language had been met with limited success. The same could be said about certain cultural subtleties that both picked up on, but neither could really identify. However, as both seemed to be avoiding a particular topic, Sarah decided it would be better to show than to tell, and suggested Mick give the group a tour of his ship. The airlock elevator system, housing area, and dining area had all been fairly standard by Tense's eye. The aesthetics were vaguely familiar, and some of the particular art and partnering was certainly Anishinaabe. However, it simply didn't feel like how he thought it should. Not that the design was completely uninspired, but rather almost everything bore the distinctive hallmarks of standardized modules designed for ease of construction first and aesthetics second. Out of all of it, the agricultural, dare he say botanical, area of this ship was truly impressive. Tense had only been able to take a few paces into the area, just enough to allow his companions to step in past him, before he came to a complete halt. Miakorva and Nan had decided to accompany him on this tour of the Martian science vessel. However, Tarky had politely declined. The thought that there was an uncaged canine apex predator aboard the vessel triggered an instinctual fear in her she could not overcome. Despite that, Tense found Terry to be quite pleasant and reserved. It was Bitey, the angry gray avian, that may have not taken kindly to another avian entering its territory. Luckily, it was just the sentient beings going on this tour, as the two animals seemed content to stay near the smell of food. I'm glad you like it, Mick said to Tense while placing a friendly hand on the man's shoulder. With a gentle pat, he removed his hand and gestured down the path for Tense to follow. Mick was just a bit taller than Tense, but noticeably wider and more well-built. Besides that minor difference, the two men looked like they could be distant cousins, with both of them sporting high cheekbones and very similar noses. One certainly spent more time under UV light than the other. However, that was just the nature of Quaistar ship lighting. Oh, I absolutely love it. Tense found himself entranced by the natural beauty of so much diverse and well-cultured plant life. Things he had heard descriptions of in history records, but never seen, such as the bright red berries he saw growing on trellises. Walking closer to inspect the plant, he couldn't help but notice the massive size of the growing area. But this seems like quite a bit for just two people. This ring structure was originally designed to feed between 10 to 20 people in perpetuity, Mick commented as he stepped up next to Tense and in front of the strawberry trellis. Those are strawberries, but I've genetically modified them, so the seeds taste like dark chocolate. Sarah likes them. Mick turned back to look at Sarah for a response. Seeing as she was busy, explaining something to the robot and blue woman. Mick didn't bother waiting. She likes them. Go ahead. They just pull off the stem with a bit of force. Mick demonstrated by pulling one of the fruits off the plant and eating it in a single large bite. No allergens? Right. Tens was a bit apprehensive about eating a genetically modified plant, but also wasn't about to say no. Reaching towards the wall of plants, he plucked a particularly large and juicy-looking fruit and examined it closely. As long as you're not allergic to shellfish, you'll be fine, Mick replied nonchalantly. Shellfish? No, but what? Tens was cut off before he could finish his question. Then you'll be fine, Mick reassured him, without really reassuring him. Hesitantly, Tens lifted the fruit up to his mouth and took a tentative bite, unsure of what to expect. As the flavor flowed across his tongue, it was like his brain was being reminded of something that it had been desperately missing for his entire life. The sweet flavor of fruit was being perfectly complemented by the richness the seeds imparted. He could barely describe the combination as he quickly shoved the rest of the fruit from his mouth and picked two more. Hey, boy, you two gotta try these, Tense shouted in excitement as he turned back towards his compatriots who had wandered a bit further away, chasing after them. And quickly closing the gap, he extended the hand containing the fruits towards Nan. Are these safe for Quiztar? Let me see, Nan replied, as they lifted a fruit and looked at it closely. As a mouth-like hole emerged from their liquid metal face, they dropped the fruit in and made a pleasant sound as the hole resealed. After a moment of apparent contemplation, Nan spoke back up. Yes, and they are quite delicious. Let me be the judge of that, Mia Corva retorted as she reached for the remaining fruit in Tenz's hand. Sarah was standing on the other side of the two, and was standing on her tiptoes to look over Mia Corva's shoulder to see what the commotion was about. Though Mia Corva wasn't as a prime female, and thus not as tall as Axika, she was still tall enough to obscure the interaction. Oh, those? Sarah finally asked, after being able to see the strawberry in Mia Corva's hand, as the blue woman went to take a bite. You won't be ready for it, but the warning came too late as the Quiztar ate the entire fruit in a single large bite. The noises that escaped the dark blue lips weren't really words, but rather raw expressions of delight. The Admiral is going to be angry if you don't bring her some of those, she finally commented, after taking a moment to savor the flavor. I've definitely got some to share, Mick added as he joined the group. But I'll need to know how many to have the drones harvest and pull from storage. I've got a bunch in frozen storage and as preserves. We have a crew of just over 50,000 souls. As much as I'm sure they would all appreciate the gesture, I don't think you have enough for everyone. The way Mia Corva explained it implied a far more equitable distribution system than Sarah or Mick would have imagined for a military vessel. Sensing the confusion, she explained further. The Admiral and Officer Corps do not receive any special treatment compared to other members. We could hold a lottery, but that inevitably leads to general moral decline. I mean, I have a lot, but maybe not that much, Mick confirmed with a slight hint of astonishment. But my storage is completely full, And I'm producing way too much for just Sarah and I. I could have